Story 1. I once dated a guy whose dad was something else. He was this quiet, short-tempered man who kept to himself most of the time. He was a truck driver and also a pretty skilled hunter. But there was something about him that always gave me the creeps. Whenever we were all hanging out, laughing and joking around, his dad would suddenly walk into the room. With this cold expression, he'd say how much he wanted to strangle us, carve out our eyeballs. And believe it or not, everyone would just laugh it off and say, "Oh, Dad," like it was some kind of inside joke. But I never found it funny. Not even a little bit. One Thanksgiving, I was in the basement, grabbing something, and his dad came down. He didn't know I was there, and I could hear him talking to himself. He was muttering about perfecting the glaze, laying it on thick, and how nobody would suspect it. It sent chills down my spine. Later, when it was time to cook, he insisted on doing everything himself. He wouldn't let anyone else help. But then, he didn't eat any of the food he made. Not a single bite. That night, everyone in the house got really sick. We all had diarrhea, stomach pains, and were vomiting like crazy. It was the worst Thanksgiving I'd ever experienced. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong with him. Not long before I finally decided to leave that relationship for good, his dad took a truck driving job that required training in Ohio. We lived in Illinois, so it wasn't too far, but nobody heard from him for about 2 weeks. Then, out of the blue, he called home, crying. He said he was in Washington State, of all places, and had lost his wallet and ID. He needed help getting back home and kept saying how much he missed his family. What really bothered me was how no one asked any questions. They just got him back home like nothing was out of the ordinary. It didn't sit right with me, especially since I couldn't forget how he had started driving for Uber that New Year's Eve in the city. Around that same time, there were a few stories in the news about women who had gone missing after getting into an Uber. They were never seen again. Even after all this time, I can't help but wonder if there was more to those stories than anyone wanted to admit. Story 2. My mom shared this story with me, and it's always stuck with me. We live in Mexico, and years ago, she had to travel a lot for work. On one of these trips, she met a northern teacher who told her about a strange experience he had. It all happened in Chiapas, a state in the south of Mexico that I know well and hold dear. This teacher's job was to visit remote rural schools, the kind that take 10 hours to reach, traveling through mountains and dense forests. On one of these trips, they made a quick stop in the middle of nowhere to take care of business. The teacher wandered a bit past the tree line, where the forest was thick, and he noticed a large, flat stone. He described it as looking like a stone bed, right on the edge of a cliff. As he was minding his own business, one of his colleagues called out to him, warning that it was dangerous to be on that rock and telling him to get off. He didn't think much of it at the time and got back in the car with everyone else. But as soon as they started driving, he suddenly felt strange and passed out. In his dream, he found himself back on that stone. But now, there was a battle raging around him. Native Mayans were fighting Spanish conquistadores, and it was intense. He said he could walk through the battle like he was invisible. No one seemed to notice him. But then, something changed. A Mayan warrior locked eyes with him, and that's when things got terrifying. The warrior charged at him with a club, and the fear was so real that it jolted him awake. Or at least, that's what he thought. In reality, he'd been unconscious for about 10 hours, though it felt like just a few minutes to him. His colleagues were terrified when they couldn't wake him up and decided to rush him to the nearest doctor. This was a rural area, so the drive took hours. They were desperate to either save him or make sure they didn't end up being accused of something like homicide. What's strange is that there's no record of any famous battle happening in that exact spot, though the teacher described it more like a small skirmish anyway. He wasn't the type to be into anything paranormal, and he was very serious about his work. But he couldn't shake how real the dream felt, especially when the Mayan warrior noticed him. He said it was like his invisibility had been broken, and that's what scared him the most. Story 3. I was at my friend's house, just lying in bed like usual, when something happened that I still can't explain. It scared me so much that I didn't even understand what was real anymore. My friend lives way out of town, in a pretty creepy area, not your typical sketchy, but more like witchcraft and cult territory. It was around 2 a.m., and I was still awake. Or at least I thought I was. I was so unbelievably tired that I could barely keep my eyes open. Just as I was drifting off, halfway between asleep and awake, I was abruptly woken up by scratching on the window. Here's where things get confusing. As I woke up, or at least I thought I did, I looked around the room. The TV was on, the air conditioner was humming, and the room was dimly lit by the gray glow of the TV screen. I could see that this wasn't my room, it was my friend's. But for some reason, in that moment, I thought it was my room, and that the scratching was just my cat trying to get in. There wasn't any other noise, just the scratching, and what sounded like a bear trying to meow. I ignored it and started to drift off again, figuring I'd let my cat in later, since she usually wanted to go back out soon after. I rolled over and tried to sleep. But just as I was about to doze off again, I was woken up by banging on the window. I opened my eyes. Again, the TV was on, the fan was whirring, the air conditioner was running, and now the banging was getting louder. But for some reason, I still didn't realize this wasn't my room, and that it couldn't be my cat. Annoyed but not scared, I rolled onto my back, staring at the ceiling, still drowsy and about to fall asleep. The banging got even more aggressive, and it woke me up completely. The room was full of noises, but I just kept lying there, thinking it was my cat. Then the banging became so violent it sounded like a full-grown man was trying to rip the window off the wall, clawing at anything to get in. And then it started to speak. Not like a human, but more like something trying to mimic one. The voice was slow, scratchy, and dragged out its words. It kept saying, "Let me in, Emily, let me in." It even said my name. But somehow, I still wasn't scared. I still thought this was my room, my window, and my cat. I was confused, though. It kept asking for something, saying things like, "Are you still going to give it to me, Emily? Let me have it, give it to me, let me in." I had no idea what it was talking about. As I was about to speak back to it, the only words that came to mind were, "I was, but not now." Even though I wasn't scared, something inside me told me not to talk to it. I just couldn't get the words out. By now, it had been maybe 3 minutes, and I still wasn't scared. I didn't even realize I wasn't at my house. But then, everything got so loud and aggressive. Whatever it wasn't just banging on the window anymore. It sounded like it was trying to rip the window out of the wall entirely, slamming itself against the house and screaming at me, "Emily, let me in. You said you were going to give it to me. Will you still give it to me now?" It didn't even sound human or like any animal I've ever heard. That's when I had enough. Still thinking it was my cat, I figured I needed to let her in before she messed up the air conditioner. But as I sat up in bed, it was like I truly woke up. The room was darker, quieter. There were no more sounds coming from the window. All I could hear was the fan, the air conditioner, and my friend breathing next to me. That's when the fear set in. I looked around and finally realized this wasn't my room. There was no back door to let the cat in. This couldn't be my cat outside. I froze, terrified, listening for any noise, any scratch, anything to explain what just happened. After about 30 minutes of listening and hearing nothing, I slowly laid back down, pulling the blanket up under my chin. I stared at a cup on the nightstand, too scared to do anything else. An hour passed in silence. It was almost 4 a.m. now, and I started to relax, thinking maybe it was just a tree hitting the window or maybe I'd smoked too much before bed. Exhausted, I closed my eyes and finally fell asleep. But I couldn't have been asleep for more than 5 minutes when I heard the most gut-wrenching scream of my life. It wasn't a girl or a boy, not a human or an animal, just a scream. It woke me up, but I wasn't really awake. The room was pitch black, and I couldn't move. I could only try to look around and breathe. I heard the floor creak by the TV, and then a small click. Thinking my friend had just turned the TV off, I relaxed. But I still couldn't move, and then I realized the room wasn't dark, I just couldn't open my eyes. As I listened, I heard the floor creak again, footsteps coming closer. I still thought it was my friend, so I wasn't worried until I heard a noise from the window. The footsteps stopped, but then I heard crying, something trying to sound like a person or an animal in pain. The voice was low, groaning, scratchy, and it echoed. My heart sank. The earlier noises didn't scare me, but this one made it hard to breathe. I was completely frozen, focused only on the noise outside. Then, I felt my friend roll over behind me, and I realized he was still in bed. Thinking he'd heard the noises too and was about to check on them, I relaxed a little. But he didn't say anything. He just rolled over and put his arm on me. The moment he touched me, my eyes shot open and I could move again. Everything went silent. I ripped the blanket off and sat up, looking at the TV, which was still on with the classic Roku screen. I darted my head to the window, staring for what felt like forever. But there was nothing, no sound, no light, nothing. After that, I was genuinely terrified. I stared at the ceiling until the sun came up, and only then did I finally fall asleep. The next morning, I told my friend about it. He said he didn't hear a single thing, but he was worried. He told me his mother had engraved Bible verses at the base of their house, all along the foundation, and had blessed all the doors and windows. After hearing my story, he thought something was trying to get into the house, and it knew I was the weak link. Something was trying to get me to let it in, into my friend's house, something his mom was trying to keep out. This happened just last night, and I've been paranoid all day, unable to shake the feeling that something is watching me. I don't know what this means or what to do,